Well, little helpers, welcome back. Today we have a highly requested episode. This has been requested for years, and one that I think the vast majority of us can relate to. Certainly, I can relate to it, and we will be bringing in personal aspects of our relationship with this construct into this episode. So, this episode is on body image. I think we're going to talk about it from multiple angles. I mean, one is what it's like to be a young woman with this ideal. Another is like Kibby, what it's like to have just gone through pregnancy and be raising a baby and these sort of changing body image. We have a follower story about being post mastectomy and what that's been like. So body image is something that is so prevalent in our culture, yet it changes in all these different ways. And it does seem to affect women more than men, although men certainly have their struggles with this as well.
They do. Men just have different ones. And it's a weird time for body image issues because I think you would think that with COVID and being socially isolated that this would get better. But I don't know. I think that this is, I mean, I have to look at the research about before and after, but I think anecdotally, I think people are more aware of body image more than ever because we're all on our phones all the time, right? Like social media, we're on Zoom all the time. Like everything is kind of projected and everything can be filtered and changed. And we're just looking at each other all the time and presenting ourselves in this very photographic way. So
yeah, it's interesting. I was actually reading a meta-analysis about social media and body image. And I think you're right. Like anecdotally, I mean, I know that my body image is affected when I see my super hot friends. And guess what? I have super hot friends because I was on The Bachelor. So I can certainly talk about how that affected my body image.
All right, brag much?
It's not even bragging. I just like when you go on The Bachelor, you leave with super hot friends and it affects how
I know
you
something
see
about
your
body image. I have really hot friends.
I do have hot friends. That's not a comment on myself.
Jacqueline leads a very different life than I do in some aspects. Like,
I don't know, Kibby. You're always telling me like, "Hey, can you stream this show because my friend is on it? She's the beautiful one, or she's Alexis Daddario, or whatever her name is. So she really use the streaming credits." So anyway, anecdotally, yeah, I think that's true. Interestingly, though, the research on social media use and body image is pretty inconclusive. This meta-analysis found only a small positive correlation between body image dissatisfaction and social media use.
really?
There were moderators, however. So it really depends on, how you use social media. I mean, if you're following primarily content that is body oriented, then it's going to have a bigger effect. But if you're following, craftsmen or cooking channels or your friends who might be more normative, bodily normative, then it's not going to have as big an effect. I also imagine that following Instagram is going to be the worst. It's going to have the worst effect on your body image versus like Facebook or even TikTok might be more about, either friends' content or like what the person is saying, less about what they look like. They also found that the country where social media was being used had an effect. And this really probably just breaks down to race because they found that in Australia, it was the worst. And Australia is almost entirely white. And we know that white women have the biggest attachment to the thin ideal. Although I don't know about Asian women. That didn't seem to be studied in this analysis. Yeah. And then age. So younger women are more at risk.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's funny that we just launched right into talking about social media. That just shows like how connected at least those topics are, body image and social media. But as we're talking about it, I'm thinking like, what are we talking about here with body image and mental health? Are we just talking about how thin we are? Or are we talking about, do we like our bodies? Like how do we want to define it?
Yeah. I mean, it actually seems pretty disconnected from BMI. I mean, it seems that body image gets worse with increased BMI, but people still have pretty negative body image at a normal or thin BMI. So no, we're talking about our self-perceptions.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on it, right? That from the research that we're looking at, whenever we just say body image, it's usually like body image issues or body image dysmorphia. So it's just all different ways that the way we perceive our bodies lives up to a certain expectation that we have, right? And so often that those expectations are what we are talking about, like with these standards, ideals, like what's how thin do we need to be? How beautiful do we need to be? How physically strong, right? And
yeah,
the question I always have is how much of that is something that's standard throughout time that actually makes sense in terms of what we're looking at in terms of beauty or reproductive fitness, or is it something that really changes with trends, right? Does it change, like,
yeah,
now that we have different kind of celebrities and body types that we do like in the 70s? Well, what does that mean in terms of our body image? Right?
It seems like from what I was reading, it's certainly the latter, but there's also a little bit of the former. So there are studies showing that babies will actually show preference, or at least distinguish between like conventionally attractive people and not conventionally attractive people. And babies don't have much of an opportunity to be influenced by their parents. And so this might indicate a biological preference for certain traits. And I think we can also talk about this in terms of like those traits are pretty, there might be some universality in those, but there's so much variance within them. So it seems like sexual dimorphism, so, very masculine or very feminine looking people, symmetry, so facial symmetry, and hip to waist ratio in women. Those seem to be like the three most kind of universal traits. But I mean, hip to waist ratio is really interesting, right? Because that actually says nothing about BMI. You could be have high BMI, but have very curvaceous body,
right,
with a smaller waist.
Yeah.
And like a symmetrical face can look radically different. They're very different looking symmetrical faces.
Yeah.
So we see that babies have this preference, and then we see that 5-year-old children, 6-year-old children start having preferences for thin peers. And that may be influenced by the parents. And one kind of clue to this is we see that white parents have a thin white child ideal, like they have a thin child ideal. And Latino and Black parents are much more flexible with this. And so it would be interesting if then we see that translated into the children, where children of color are more flexible.
That is so interesting and so sad. That is.
Yeah, well, you can certainly talk about that from personal experience.
Yeah, I mean, I already see that. My baby's only 8 months, but people are commenting on his size all the time, like, oh, he's big like his parents, or
oh God,
he's so chubby. And some people are like, that's so great, and some people are like, oh, look how chubby he is, he's gotta start moving. So it's really interesting how quickly, and even these studies with babies, sometimes we don't know yet how much like feedback from the parents and the environment influences babies' preferences. We always pretend that if babies show anything in psychology, that means it's just innate and genetic. But I could, I could see how my baby smiles when someone like looks at them and smile. So I could just see that those influences happen so early.
Yeah, it's totally possible. I mean, I don't know how early we would have to go to make sure that there's no parental influence.
Right.
And I'm guessing this was kind of an eye tracking study or pointing to that picture.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's interesting with you having a boy baby and actually wanting him to be bigger, right? I mean, that was something you said in part, I don't know if I can say this, but in part to protect against like Asian male discrimination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man. This topic is just so pervasive in ways that I just, I forgot. So thank you for reminding me. Yeah, I mean, that's a whole thing. I mean, I've, that I'm half Asian and half white. So body image is such a weird topic for me, because being in New York City, growing up here, there is an ideal here that's slightly different than in Hong Kong and in China. But thin ideal is like common among both for women, and tall for like big for men, right? But they just treat it very differently. I feel like I'm just going on a tangent, I'm sorry, but you're just making me think about my childhood.
No, I love this.
And here, there's so much like subtle communication of that that ideal, right? It's this um who's going to be the popular one, who do you think is cool, right? And who do you want to wear the clothes of, right? And who does someone point to as like, wow, they look great, all these are like indirect communications of this ideal, or like even the movies and things like that. Sometimes you really do get parents who say, you're too fat, you should be this, or you're too XYZ, you should be that. And so that's people's negative body image kind of gets baked in with explicit instructions.
Are you still talking about America?
Yeah, I'm talking about America. And in China, I would say that I think probably the thin ideal is even more extreme. Like they're really, at least growing up, I know things probably have changed, but in Hong Kong, it's really prized for women to be very, very thin and very, very small. And I was just a giant and light skin. Yeah. So there's actually like bleaching ingredients in a lot of the facial, even just like face wash, there's like bleaching ingredients because you want to look like someone who's not out in the sun working, I'm guessing. And but they're just so much more explicit about it. I feel like in Chinese culture, the parents are thinking that they're doing a kindness by telling you why you're not living up to a certain standard. Like, this is how they tell you they love you, is by criticizing you. That's
like my family.
Yeah, they're just doing it because they love you, just telling you how you could be better. Yeah. And I've in the US, it might be like, you, I don't know. They would never actually say like, wow, you gained weight or whatever. There might be like subtle indications of that. But I've been to Hong Kong. They're like, wow, you've gained a lot of weight, huh? Why?
Why?
One of my first phrases that I learned in Chinese is "matnegam feya," which means "why are you so fat?"
No,
yeah, that's like the only real sentence I know in Cantonese, isn't that?
Because they said it to you so often.
I don't know, man. I don't want to. Do I want to trace that memory? But I even had someone in my family tell me explicitly. This is so Chinese. I mean, she didn't mean bad by it at all, but she said, if the thing is that, Kibby, if you lost like 10 to 15 pounds, you wouldn't have to date all these student types. It's just like, I was flabbergasted. I was so furious, but she literally thought she was saying something nice to me. She was like, oh, if you lose weight, you will be a higher valued woman and would get higher valued men, which is quantified by like their occupation.
Yeah. Okay.
So it was just so explicit. It was just shocking. What was your original question? Oh yeah. Male ideal. So yeah, I mean, so the size was always like a big thing for me growing up. I would be considered like somewhat normal on the bigger side here, but in Asia it's just a monster. And for my son, the first thing that came out in my mind was like he has very Asian eyes, very Asian features, and there was just such a relief seeing how big he is, because any male, especially Asian male who's small, especially in the US, that's associated that's associated with a lot of body image issues for men, but especially with Asian men who already have very, who have features that are considered feminine by Western standards, right? Like smooth skin, not so much hair, right? A lot of Asian men in America struggle with looking masculine and feeling masculine in the US. I've had a lot of patients who are male and Asian who struggle with that, feeling like they don't fit that standard of like the hot
sexual dimorphism.
Yeah, exactly. So, so that's just such a sad bias, and I'm thankful that my son is big because he looks more Asian. So that's sad.
Yeah. I mean, how does it make you feel when people say, oh, he's so big, he's so chubby? I imagine you don't love the like his parents part.
Well, the weird thing is that he is like very big, like he's the size of a 2-year-old, and we're not like 7 feet
you're not
tall,
enormous.
So I don't know what to happen. I just get confused. I think I do have to say that over the course of my life, because I've had all these weird body image, like different messages about it, I've learned to be a little bit more comfortable with my own definition and in my own perception of myself. It's not perfect. I always do feel like I'm not XYZ enough, not thin enough, small enough. But I do see that that like health and like functioning and things like that are way more important. Probably because of my yoga background. I think having so much of a yoga practice helped me appreciate my body for as it is.
Yeah.
And so when I hear that my son is big, all I'm thinking is like, well, thank goodness he's healthy.
Yeah.
Because like he's just big and healthy. And that's what I'm happy about.
That's great. How was it growing up Asian in white, like with white beauty ideals? Was that something you struggled with?
It was weird. It was weird because I definitely think that had an impact on sexual attraction towards me in many ways. Like growing up, I wasn't this ideal that's here. You know, I wasn't this like white, skinny white, straight haired looking girl. I mean, if you look on Gossip Girl, like that's it. And so I wasn't found as attractive. I was kind of like, you know, seen as weird or different. And then the first attention I got, sexual attention I got, were people who specifically liked Asian women.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Our Asian mutual friend has really been investigating that and been kind of freaked out by that feeling. Like she can't tell if she dates a white man, is he just fetishizing me, or am I just one of his myriad types? And that's really, really bothered her. So is that something that bothered you, or were you just kind of like whatever about it?
I mean, sadly, to be honest, it didn't. Well, let me think. I don't think it bothered me because it was the first time I felt attractive. You know, I think it bothered me more that being Asian or any other kind of ethnicity was not considered attractive or cool or whatever, unless I was like super skinny or unless I looked a specific way as an Asian, right? So there was part of me that got excited about that, but then it did come with a lot of associations. Like this happened a little bit more in Germany. In Germany, there were people who, like my boyfriend there, I think really did like that I was Asian because he was dating like someone of like multicultural. And he was really interested in being multicultural and being interested in the world and stuff. But then it came with a lot of associations like I should be so submissive. I should listen to what he says. Like I should be able to be a good cook. And I think he actually asked me to cook him Chinese food a couple times. And I was like, I don't know how to do that. So it does come with some expectations. And yeah, it's not finding you sexy for you, it's finding you sexy for like this objectified type, but isn't everyone? I don't know. But what about you? I mean, you out of the two of us for body image, you have been on television. Like, how did that impact you? How does your body image change like before and after that?
The Bachelor was an interesting experience for that because I assumed, okay, I have always disliked my body, which a lot of people have found absurd because I'm thin and I have big boobs. But I grew up in a family that was very obsessed with appearance, like intensely obsessed. My mother, for instance, is in her 70s and body image is supposed to improve, you know, by that point, and still obsessed with thinness. So many comments about it. And she's beautiful. So, I mean, she looks great. My dad does like, I mean, this is not an exaggeration. He does, I think, about 1,000 push-ups a day, broken up, not all at one time, but like an insane number of push-ups, jumping jacks, or whatever else he's doing. He was always running up and down stairs, just like constantly every time there's a staircase running up and down stairs.
Power to them, man. That's
I know. And that's the thing. Like, this is going to sound critical, but at the end of the day, I don't know that I really want to be different. Like, you know, they are in exceptional physical health. I mean, my mom has like a lung condition called Lady Windermere's, which is for thin blonde women who live by marshes. It's like some oddly specific thing like that. She's a thin blonde woman who lives by a marsh. But yeah, I mean, I know that they are going to be able to travel with me probably into their 80s. Like they are, yeah, they're in great shape and they look great. But
growing up, was the message you have to be thin for a certain reason? Like how, I think what goes in, we're researching about how what goes into body image is a lot of, you know, our thoughts, right? Our cognitions, like why we believe being thin is good, what it does for us, what happens if we don't, or don't measure up to this standard. So like, did you get any messages of that or?
Oh, I sure did. A little bit different from each of my parents. And also I have 3 older siblings, much older siblings, right? So I have 5 different messages for why you should be thin. I'll only go into the first, my parents, but my dad was a health nut. So he was constantly finding new poisonous objects like peanut butter that needed to be thrown out. We were allowed that to get organic peanut butter. So it has a happy ending, but all sorts of things were suddenly verboten from the house, really, really obsessed with being healthy, which I'm grateful for because he was also a really good cook. So I didn't have that rebelliousness of like, I'm going to eat junk food forever. I have an appreciation for healthy food. My mother, this is going to sound so terrible, but I don't disagree with her. I have 3 siblings and all of us were pretty good looking when we came out. Obviously age has taken its toll a little bit, but my mom liked to think of us as her artistic creations. And if we ruined ourselves by gaining weight, for instance, then she was very unhappy that we ruined her art. My mother in general has an obsession with beauty, and I kind of inherited that, to be honest. So her house is very beautiful. The clothes she wears are not expensive, but like she does herself very well. She only loves the beautiful countries. I mean, she's definitely obsessed.
She's very visual
person, very visual person. And also, I think that as a thin woman herself, she saw how far it got her. And her mother. So my mom, I think, is gorgeous, but my mom has more of like a sort of stronger, stronger boned, kind of like more angular face. And her mother was really beautiful and had like a softer kind of more classical face. And my mom was constantly compared to her mother. And so I think when she had pretty children, she was like, you guys get to be beautiful, like be beautiful. It gets you so much in life. And then, you know, my older sister is, again, obsessed with her body. And I just grew up, especially from my sister, getting a lot of comments about, I always had like some stomach fat, which is why I'm so dissatisfied with my body. And comments like, God, Doc, you look great. You look so great. If you just lose 5 pounds right there, then you will be amazing. And that kind of comment, like coming right back from a year in Slovakia where the diet was extremely different. A lot of passive aggressive comments like, oh, wow, you look great just like you are right now. Just like right now, like not how you were before, but like stay here.
Yeah, this is the standard and you're there.
Yeah, you're there.
What did they say it would get you? Like, was there any explicit discussion of that? But you say that, you know, you saw how far it could get you.
So this is interesting because I actually want to talk about it later. There was definitely a pandering to men in my family, which was weird because my mother and my sister make the most money out of anyone in my family. And they're both doctors. They always work full time. I mean, my mom's like a complete badass, was the primary breadwinner. But I think because she grew up, I mean, you know, she grew up in the 60s and 70s and 80s. She was like one of 6 women in med school, you know, and so pandering to men was so important in her life, being accepted into male circles. And I do think she saw her beauty as one of the major reasons for her acceptance. So, but I want to be clear, my parents did not just care about appearance. They were very invested in intelligence and success as well. So,
oh boy. Yeah.
Yeah. Kindness, take it or leave it, but success, intelligence, and beauty were like the main ones. Yeah. So lots of comments about, you know, one of my brothers is very good looking. He was actually the sexiest bachelor from West Virginia on Cosmopolitan magazine in 2007. That was shared widely, you know. mean, like,
So how did TV impact the way you saw yourself?
The Bachelor.
Yeah.
So my family was very invested in being thin, but not necessarily toned. So I'd never had a very toned body. I never worked out really. When I went on The Bachelor, I just assumed I would go home quickly. And I didn't feel like I was one of the girls. I just didn't feel like I fit in. I didn't think I was pretty enough, specifically that my body wasn't pretty enough. And so I went in kind of protected a little bit from that, just sort of assuming like, yep, if I make it far, it's not going to be because of my looks.
Wow.
Also not expecting to make it far. Then I made it pretty far, and my body image actually really improved after that because Ari clearly didn't give a shit. Like he told me over and over how physically attracted he was to me. And yeah, I think afterwards I was just like, oh, you don't have to have a perfect body to have all these gains from things. But then after that, when Ari was no longer part of the picture and it was back to just me and my friendships, being in bikinis around women from The Bachelor was very painful for me. And I have a memory of like this guy that I had dated right after The Bachelor, I was like so in love with, and he lived in Hawaii. And after we'd broken up, I went for Ari and Lauren's wedding, and he flew over from his island, and we were kind of like a semi-couple, semi-not. It was very confusing and painful. And I was like in a bikini in Hawaii with Jenna and Mikkel and Marique, and I just wanted to die. I was like, and this guy, right? Like nothing is worse than being dumped by a guy, and now he's back for a hot second, and then three of your like hottest friends are there in bikinis, and then I'm just like dumpy looking in my own head, right?
Right.
So yeah, I mean, and the inability to, I always felt like I could never have great fashion because my stomach fat would always show. I mean, I almost like sometimes I think I've had days when I border on body dysmorphia in some ways. And then Zoom screens didn't help because I have this like chin fat that I'm absolutely obsessed with. And so you'll always see me massaging
for that. She is, Jacqueline is really interested in her chin. It looks...
Yeah. But on the other hand, I 90% of the time go without makeup. Like I'm not afraid to show up looking like trash to places. So it's just weird, this relationship I have. It's like I need to be able to attain a level of perfection, and I'm obsessed with the gap between where I am and perfection.
Yeah.
But I don't need to hit that all the time. I'm also perfectly comfortable just looking normal some of the time.
Yeah, I mean, from just our stories, I think what we're getting at too is the cognitions that are baked into body image is like, what can it get you in life?
Yeah.
Right. It's like, okay, fine. You meet the standard or you don't, or you meet a different standard, or there is no standard, whatever your belief is. What does that mean for you? That's what I was asking. Cause I was like, get you far. I mean, what does that mean? Does it mean that you marry someone who loves you? Does it mean you're going to get a good job? Does it mean you're going to get on TV? Does it mean, power? All these things are kind of sometimes associated with your, like, how, I think we talked about this even in social hierarchy conversations about like, where do you rank in the social hierarchy, and what does that allow you in society? Yeah. And I think I have been lucky that I grew up with parents and an environment that valued my intelligence and my academic achievement more than my body. I mean, I certainly did feel the ding of not being like as hot as some other women, but I learned to identify more my value and what I can get in life through my hard work, which frankly, I'm happy about now because my body's gone through so many changes and things like that. And we're aging, that I feel like my hard work or my intelligence is something that I could kind of hold on to for longer than my body. And it's like, in its, ideal or non-ideal state.
Yeah. And I felt like for me, it was a 50-50 split. Yeah. And I mean, intelligence and success was really also essential in my family. But yeah, I mean, I do think also like, that my negative core beliefs are about capability and competence and ADHD or whatever. And so there have definitely been times when I've relied on my appearance, and I've had an over-reliance on my appearance, and that makes it extra scary to age.
Right. Yeah. You're going with what you get well, we all are going with what we get reinforced for, right? And so if you
Right.
get reinforced for your looks, you're going to be like, this is the thing that, that people like, that I'm,
Right.
this much on this, based on this standard. So I'm going to keep using it.
Yeah. And I certainly think that I've had a lot of doors open to me because of how I look.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and I mean, I've had experiences that other women have talked about, like, okay, fiction writing is a passion of mine, especially when I was in college. I had an older male, a very older man, like 75 years old male mentor, who I do think he liked my writing, but he seemed to especially like it when it had themes of sex in it. And then he kind of propositioned me later. So I was like, did he like my writing or did he like me? Don't know. So yeah, stuff like that. I definitely seduced bosses in the early days when I didn't think I could do the work.
Oh my God.
I've talked about that. It's just terrible. Yeah. So there is a point, and I mean, I've I've talked about how I clearly have some issues here, but there's body image issues, and then it can rise to the point of body dysmorphia or body dysmorphic disorder. Can you tell us a little bit about the symptom profile of BDD?
Yeah, body dysmorphia is an interesting disorder. It's in the category obsessive compulsive and related disorders. I would think it's something to do with eating disorder, but it's actually a little bit more of an OCD flare.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that people throw around that topic a lot, like body dysmorphia, but it's kind of hard to tell what's like a normal body image obsession. Like we all kind of think about it a lot, especially during our teenage years, and what's like a diagnosable disorder. But this is the actual DSM criteria. So one of the criteria is preoccupation with one or more perceived deficits or flaws in physical appearance that are not observable or appear slight to others. So that's kind of hard. That's subjective, right? Because people who often have these disorders like are around kind of like difficult environments where they might point out flaws. But it's kind of sounds like this. I assessed one person who was like, I'm just obsessed with my nose. I think my nose is too big. I look at every picture and see how big my nose looks in every picture. And I try to do filters to change it. And I just can't. Whenever I look in a mirror, all I could see is my nose. And her nose looked normal to me. Which is subjective, of course, but it's like, it sounded like a fixation on one part of you. Whereas other people, when you ask a question, do you worry about a flaw? People are like, yeah, I don't really like my thighs or whatever, but it comes and goes, right? That's more normal. The other part of body dysmorphia is that someone has to have repetitive behaviors. So it's a little bit of, that's why the OCD comes in, but checking mirrors, grooming, skin picking, reassurance seeking, or like comparing appearance with yours and other people, like constantly looking at Facebook pictures over and over and over again. Of course, that a level of that is normal, but it's the other part that's important is if it gets in the way of your life. Like, does it cause so much distress that you can't actually live out your full life? Does it make does it interfere with work? Like, are you doing this like several hours a day during work, or does it make you not want to go see people or see your friends, or does it change the way you feel about yourself to the point where you can't even like engage in your hobbies or relationships? And also this can't be something that's related to eating disorders. So eating disorders are usually related to like obsession with thinness and doing things to get thin, right? So really, really close, but body dysmorphia has this really specific profile of like obsessing over one part and checking it over and over.
Yeah, and it's rarely diagnosed in people who say that weight is their major concern.
Yeah.
Isn't that right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that these are comorbid. Like I'm sure that people who are obsessed with their weight are also worried about, one flaw, but yeah, it's a different category.
It's so sad. I mean, this is, one of the causes of going for repeated plastic surgeries and just, I'm kind of surprised it's not characterized as an obsessive compulsive.
It is. I mean,
okay.
It's one of the OCD disorders. So it's like on the spectrum. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's truly sad to assess somebody with this because you see how limiting their life has become. and they look like normal people.
Yeah.
And so it just feels like this loss, this sort of unnecessary loss
Yeah.
of a life well lived.
Yeah, and it's tricky with, I think you make a good point with plastic surgery, where you have this very expensive, very risky way of fixing, quote unquote, fixing these flaws, and that it just keeps going, right? It doesn't actually fix the problem. Yeah.
Right.
So.
I mean, if the issue is not actually how the thing looks, then plastic surgery might not actually do anything.
Yeah.
It's a cognitive process. So speaking of, I mean, how can we start to heal from either BDD or negative body image?
Apparently age, just get older and just stop giving a shit. That really apparently empirically is supposed to help.
It does, although they've seen that majority of women still want to lose weight.
Yeah.
So if you think this is fully cured, think again.
Well, yeah, this is where the tips come in. I mean, this is where interventions or what other people can do to help come in. But reading the research, like a meta-analysis on interventions, not surprisingly, the things that help are any kind of treatment or any kind of intervention on thoughts, right? Cognitions about body image. So where did your body image issues come from? What are they, right? To understand what ideal are you looking for? What do you believe that does for you? How do you believe you measure up? Like really understanding your belief system around body image and working on them, right? Easier said than done. I don't think any intervention of just love yourself would just be enough, right?
Thanks. Yeah.
I mean, you would think
I'll
so.
try that.
Just stop. You look great. That's what friends usually say. And then that feels good in a moment, but they're like, yeah, but they're hotter than me. So of course, but with a lot of body image issues, there's dichotomous thinking that's an issue, like this black or white. You are thin or you're fat. You are perfect or you're not. You are the Trumbull standard of approval, or you have 5 pounds of a little bit of stomach fat, right? So just thinking that there is like a black and white is one area to target, where it's like, no, actually there's a spectrum. There's a spectrum of beauty. People like fat or even size can just be so different that how can you actually have one standard, right? And another thing that's interesting is there's these kind of cognitive interventions that target our understanding of media and how that influences the way you see body image. So a lot of it is just understanding the media and marketing and how that works, and understand that if you make people feel bad about themselves, they'll buy more products.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, because the very existence of certain products insinuates that there's an issue in the first place.
Yeah.
So if you see anti-aging products, it's like, oh no, I'm not allowed to age. Oh, okay. Well, now I feel bad about that.
Yeah. I mean, as soon as I gave birth, I got so many Instagram and Facebook ads for like, these influencers saying like, postpartum, I was really struggling with my tummy pouch, but look what I did. And now only 2 months later, I am skinnier than I was before. And just seeing that, I was just like, oh my God, how long has it been? I'm such a schlub. I really got to get back on this train. But even to take all of those influences, right? That thing that's like creating the standards for like financial incentives and understanding what they're doing actually does have some effect on some people's belief of their own body image. It's like, oh wait, I've been taught all this time that being thin is like the ideal, but really that's because that people make money off of that belief.
Yeah. Oh, fuck. Okay. I don't know if I have anything to say until the functionality part, and then I have a lot to say. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, you at least speak from the social media influencer side, if you want to mention anything about that.
So, well,
marketer.
the interesting thing about, so going back to the social media conversation. It turns out that actually traditional media has a bigger effect on body image than social media. And that is likely because social media is a lot more diverse than media. Media is pushing you purely, filtered, photoshopped white women and white women. Of course, that's expanding now to include women of other races, but it's interesting because we see much greater body image issues in white women, and that may be because white women have only been portrayed, like only white women have been portrayed in media until recently.
Interesting.
And so Black women, for instance, haven't had to compare themselves to some media ideal. And now that's changing. And so that we might see differences there.
Right. But they have a whole other body image issue of just not being the right color. Right. Yeah, and so that's a whole level of body image issues. I mean, that's unattainable, right? Versus like, I could be thin,
Yeah, it was interesting that the article seemed mostly to be talking about weight issues, but of course, racism must have an effect on body image when it comes to skin or facial features or whatever. But yeah, when it comes to this thin ideal, that seems to affect mostly white women. And, I mean, my social media feed is a lot of beautiful women who I'm specifically friends with. And that the closer you get to a person, the more easily you can compare yourself to them. And so I am suddenly comparing myself with women who are close to me. And women tend to make upward comparisons, whereas men tend to make downward comparisons. So there's actually some protective factors that keep men from having the same body image issues as women. But yeah, one is that women tend to compare themselves to models, their most beautiful friends, celebrities, whatever, and that makes you feel worse. Versus men are more likely to compare themselves to their less attractive friends or just less attractive people generally, apparently. And that boosts your self-esteem. So if you ever need to feel better, just look at a picture of an ugly person, I guess, and that's how to solve it. I mean, it's like such twisted logic.
And that's the tip that we have for you today.
Yeah.
All right. Here's a nicer tip from the research. One type of intervention that works on our beliefs and the way we think about body image is thinking about the function of bodies. I really like this one because I think this is what happened to me when I did a lot of yoga practice. But instead of thinking of your body as just for this image, right? The way it looks, the objectified, what it can do for you, how it's seen, but really focusing on what it can do in terms of function, right? Like, what is it capable of? How can it move? How healthy is it? So instead of, oh, wow, I really want to be thin and I'm not thin enough, you think, I have really strong legs and I've been able to run track in high school, and that made me feel really good to be really strong and fast. And every time I walk or run as an adult, like I really feel that sense of power in my body. Which that's definitely how I felt when I did yoga. I mean, even times when I, felt like the image of me wasn't great, like even times postpartum, other times in my life where I felt like, I would be able to do yoga and just be proud and feel excited that like, wow, I could twist myself in this cool way and it feels really good. So just like training your mind to think more about the body's function than image.
Yeah. I mean, I noticed that I started working out like 2 years ago because of this app called Future, by the way. Huge plug. Kibby uses it too.
Yep.
And I've noticed a little of that coming in, but growing up, I was horribly unathletic. Horribly. Like gym class was such a disaster. I mean, really, it was like a huge hit on my self-esteem. So I had no relationship to my body's function, really. It wasn't really doing anything great for me other than getting me from point A to point B. And so I think my primary use case for it was it looking good and attracting others to it. Right. So that being its primary purpose put so much pressure on it. But it's interesting. I have a lot to say about this functionality piece because, so for one thing, this is actually another reason why men tend to have better body image, because men, in order to attract mates, this is actually kind of a false perception that they have, but men like to be bigger and stronger. So they like to be able to do more with their bodies, and that correlates with a more muscular frame.
Mm-hmm.
So men tend to think that women want muscles that are bigger than they actually do, but regardless, men, they can focus on the function of their
Yeah.
bodies.
Yeah.
Men also, another reason why it goes a little bit better for them is that when puberty comes, puberty takes men closer to the ideal that they think is the ideal, and it takes women further away.
Mm,
Puberty is associated with weight gain in women, which takes them away from the thin silhouette,
mm-hmm.
and it's associated with muscle gain for men.
Mm-hmm.
So boys like naturally kind of grow closer to the ideal, whereas women feel that they don't. Um, but I did want to talk about some follower stories here because I had so one was a woman who reached out who was post mastectomy, so her breasts had been removed after cancer,
Mm,
and this is a young woman. And she was talking about she decided not to get reconstructive surgery. It would have been too invasive. She's just like, fuck it, maybe I'll do it later.
mm-hmm.
But I don't want to go through that anymore. And she talked about a lot of sadness, realizing that clothes didn't fit normally anymore. That she, didn't want to go flat chested. She didn't want to be asked questions. So she wears prosthetics.
Mm-hmm.
She wears prosthetics, but mainly to work, maybe out to dinner, like to very public places. And she decided kind of early on, like she was avoiding her closet, and then she decided, no, I'm going to take this short-term pain for long-term moving on. So she went through her closet, she removed a lot of her clothes, and yeah, just decided like dressing rooms are really painful, shopping is painful. But she had this really grounded way of talking about this. And it sounds like she's done a ton of recovery
Mm,
with her body image. And she focused on a lot of like, my breasts were removed to make me healthy.
mm-hmm.
Like the current state I'm in is what saved me.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's more of a functional approach.
Mm-hmm.
My body is healthy. That's why I like it.
Mm-hmm.
And focusing a lot of, also on gratitude. Like, again, these were removed to make me healthy. So I'm grateful for this,
Right.
for the ability for my body to survive now. And she also noticed, and this is just something I wanted to anecdotally talk about. She said she went through a 3-year hoe phase, and and she noticed that men just did not give a shit.
Uh-huh.
And now she's about to get married, and so she's like, yeah, I would tell them, while we were making out, like, hey, when you grab my tits, they're going to be prosthetics, and that's going to be pretty weird. And the quotes she got were, fuck those boobs. They had cancer. You don't need them. Another one, this one cracked me up. That's okay. I have a small penis. Then she said he actually didn't. And most commonly just, so I don't care. And she goes, I might point out these were hoe phase men, not at all a sampling of men that are just incredible humans, because some of them definitely weren't. And she's saying she wanted to make the point, like, it's not that men like accepting her was what helped. It's that she realized that so much of this was internal.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, the outside world doesn't care. This is all coming from me. And she said it also comes from the media and other women. And I had this realization kind of recently, like, no man has ever told me he doesn't like my body.
Mm-hmm.
No man has ever been like, put those clothes back on. Like, ew. This all comes from my family, me, media, and other women.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to attract other women. And the interesting thing is, if you are trying to attract other women, good news. Lesbians have better body image than straight women. So that's the irony.
Yeah. Yeah. I've always felt like, I think you're right. The times I just felt down about myself, when I started to get more attention in dating, is like when I just felt more comfortable with myself, but I didn't physically look any different. So yeah, it really is interesting how if you just change the way you view yourself, it could actually it could actually get what you want, right? It could get the thing that we think like, oh, I have to be thin in order to be attractive. It's like, actually, no. Like sometimes yes, but sometimes no. So I think,
I think the reason I do better with men when I'm thinner is because I have a higher self-confidence.
Right.
But I think that's the only variable. And I mean, I'm sure the men don't love my compulsive comments of, oh, I got fat again. Oh, I'm fat. Yesterday I was thin. God damn it. Oh, my chin. Oh, no. Oh, I hate my smile. Like all of that shit. They're always like,
And all of these body image issues, like they really come to be tested when you go through such a dramatic change, like breast cancer, right?
Yeah.
Or pregnancy, where the things that are supposed to be the female ideal, like your boobs, your weight, your hair, all those things can change in such a dramatic transition like that. And people who go through it, like I know that when I went through pregnancy, I also got worried about all those things. And I do have a good friend who is recovering from breast cancer. And even just like shifting your mind away from, okay, I've spent all my life trying to look this ideal, and be like, that ideal's gone, right? It doesn't even apply to me. Now I have to focus on that my body is trying to live, creating life, trying to heal, right? It's like what it can do, like how is it healthy and how is it healing?
Yeah, it does seem like older women have a more kind of balanced take on body image, in part because they're no longer comparing themselves to like young celebrities. That ship has sort of sailed. And also, why do they care about young celebrities? It's not their demographic anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, it does kind of make sense to be like, my body has a very different purpose now. Like, I'm going to get comfortable with that. I did just want to read one other follower story. This is Carly. Carly, hello. Carly said, I've kind of had a weird relationship with the newer body positivity movement because I've never really thought of myself as having a relationship with my body as a whole. It's just kind of how I get around. And so it feels weird for me to try to artificially have this deep loving connection with it. And while I think it's awesome that there's been a shift towards viewing being fat, overweight, or plus size as morally neutral and not a sign of any sort of character failure, a lot of my bigger friends now just both wish they were skinnier and feel guilty about wishing they were skinnier. So I think there's sometimes a disconnect between our ideals about how as a culture we should feel about our bodies and how that actually plays out on a personal level.
That's tough. That's interesting.
It's also interesting because she actually comes from a functional place. She's like, my body is how I get around. And now I'm being asked to have a relationship with it beyond that. And it's like, that's not helpful.
Yeah. And it's just interesting that this body positivity movement is either missing the mark, or there needs to be more stuff, or needs to happen for longer to really get at this ideal that we still have. Like, but I could love my fat all I want, but I still think that being thinner is better,
Yeah. So it seems like interventions for feeling better about our bodies has a lot to do with, can we concentrate on the function of our bodies? Can we really kind of look at ourselves and say, hey, thanks for all that you do, and maybe connect more with that side of things instead of just viewing ourselves as objectified beings. And can we kind of look at, like, what does that even mean? What is perfection even going to get us? What does it mean to have this ideal? Is that even that aligned with our values? Is it that necessary? Who is even putting these messages into our heads? Are we even getting this from other people, or just from consumerism?
And how much of this of your life is this taking up to try to fit an ideal? Like, are you checking too much? Are you spending all your time and energies into fitting this ideal? If so, like, what else can you do with that time and that energy? Right.
There's such an artificial cost of caring about this. And it's like, okay, do you need to be perfect, or could you just actually live a much better life by getting rid of that artificial cost and moving more towards acceptance than perfectionism?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Kibbe, do you have any resources?
Yeah, I'll link a lot of this research that we've been talking about on our site. And so I'll link some research about interventions and what body image is. And so check it out when you get a chance.
Awesome. And if you would like Kibbe and me to move more towards acceptance and away from perfectionism, please give us a perfect 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. By accessing this podcast, I acknowledge that the hosts of this podcast make no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast and any and all content or services available on or through this podcast are provided for general, non-commercial informational purposes only and do not constitute the practice of medical or any other professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and should not be considered or used as a substitute for the independent professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment of a duly licensed and qualified healthcare provider.
In case of a medical emergency, you should immediately call 911. The hosts do not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement.